great pleasure for us tonight to host Dr. Khaled Ismail. Dr. Khaled Ismail received his PhD from MIT in 1989 in electrical engineering. He is the founder and chairman of KI Angel, which is an angel investment fund for early-stage startups in the Middle East. He was also the founder and CEO of SysDesoft for wireless communication system modems, which was acquired by Intel, and Dr. Ismail became thereafter the managing director of Intel Mobile Communications. Dr. Ismail has held a large number of top executive and advisory positions. He was with IBM Research Center in New York between 1989 and 1997, the Vice President of Engineering of Ellipsis Digital Systems in Carlsbad, California, and the General Manager of Ellipsis Egypt. He was the Senior Advisor of the Egyptian Minister of Communication responsible for technology development between 2005 and 2007, and was a board member of Orascom Telecom, a board member of the IT Industry Development Authority, which is known in Egypt as ITIDA, and the chairman of Endeavor Egypt, which is a global non-profit organization supporting high-impact entrepreneurs in developing countries between 2011 and 2014. Dr. Ismail is a highly outstanding researcher as well, who won multiple awards. He's an IEEE fellow, and for those of you who might not know, being an IEEE fellow is a very high standard in the very high grade in the electrical engineering field. He has published over 160 papers in international journals and holds 22 US patents. He is the recipient of the IBM Invention Achievement Award, the IBM Outstanding Technical Achievement Award, the Ithaca New Best Young Electrical Engineer in the US in 1994, and the Showman Award for the Young Arab Engineer in 1995. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Khaled Ismail.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you for being here. It's always a great pleasure to be back in Boston after so many years. It remains one of my best places, my favorite cities, and the best memories probably that I have relate to this city and to this place, MIT. I can only envy everybody who's still studying here. I wish I was young enough to come back and study again. But that's a cycle that's over now. I'm glad to be among you here and to talk to you about some issues or ideas of things happening in Egypt, and particularly related to things I've been very much engaged in, which is entrepreneurship in Egypt during the last 3 years or so. The title of my talk may indicate that I will touch on or discuss any political issues, and I hate to disappoint anybody who is expecting that. I will not talk any politics. I have very little knowledge about politics. The word revolution may sound like related to politics, but it's not. In that sense, I would love to just give you my views of the revolution in a sense of an entrepreneur, and relate what happened in Egypt as a revolution with what's happening in Egypt as entrepreneurship, new mood that we're experiencing now in the country. And in that respect, I give you my input as an entrepreneur myself, and a serial entrepreneur, but also as an investor and a mentor of many early stage startups in Egypt for the past 3 years or so. I don't need to tell you about the revolution in January 2011, but the way I look at it is that people since a long time, I mean human beings, have always tried to fix problems. When they saw a serious problem, they tried to fix it. And some managed to fix it in a clever way, and I call them entrepreneurs, who can fix the problem and move forward and create some value behind fixing that problem. And others failed, but revolutions are no different in that sense from startups. It's a phase where people get fed up with a state of problem or some real serious issues that they are suffering from, and they go out and revolt against it, which is the first step. Always the first step that you admit that you don't like what's happening. That's the first step. You see a problem, you say, I'm going to change it. Now, whether you succeed or not is a second stage. And we hear about revolutions in history that have succeeded, but we rarely enumerate the number of revolutions in history that have failed. The numbers that have failed are 10 to 100 times more than the number of revolutions that succeeded. And similarly, the same thing applies to startups. You hear about, you know, Facebook and Google and Microsoft, but how many did fail while these companies were growing? Many, many more. So in that sense, there is some analogy there that when you try to solve a problem, that's the start of a revolution, that's the start of a startup. And whether you succeed or not depends on certain critical issues. The very important one that I see a lot in the Middle East is the ability to form a team, to stay as a team, to form partnerships, and to make value out of all of that for your own startup. I see a lot of failures. Actually, if I can say statistically, more than 60 or 70% of the failures I experience in startups in Egypt is because the stakeholders, the main founders or the main team could not stick together after a while. Could not stick together by either fighting over certain stakes, by either fighting over decision making, who takes that decision, and when they differ, they don't have a way to converge, by not aligning their longer term strategies. So one person says, oh, we've done good enough, let's sell. The other one says, no, we need to keep it, and they start fighting. A lot of that kind of misalignment between stakeholders is leading to a lot of failures. And I wouldn't call it culture. Very honestly, I hate to blame the culture because I don't think it is. I think it's more of the way people are trained and educated, rarely in teams, rarely thinking in a comprehensive way how to achieve goals, rather thinking about the individual. Are you the best in your class? How many mothers in Egypt ask their kids whether they are the best in the class? And if they are not the best, oh, there's a problem at home. You know, it's not whether how many friends you have in class, what do you do together, do you have a project? Even when they do projects, I remember when we did our graduation project from Cairo University, the 5 who were doing the project together fought together. Oh, you're not working enough. No, you're not doing what you have to do. I did everything, and why should you get the grade and I did everything? I remember that even firsthand. So it's the way we educate people, the way we train them from homes and from schools, leaves that persisting feel of the individual being more important than the goal, than the entity. And again, in that sense, if you want to go back to what happened in the revolution in Egypt, it's exactly that. It's people easily align on the problem. They say, okay, here's a problem. Mubarak was a problem, for instance. Okay, how many would agree on that? 95% of the people would agree. Now, they took Mubarak out, but they didn't think about what's the next thing. So they were not aligned on the next step. They were not aligned on who the stakeholders are, how to take decisions after that, who makes calls. All of that. You go and talk to people and say, oh, we did the revolution. No, they did the revolution. No, we own the revolution. You find a lot of people fighting, exactly like in a startup. After it starts picking up, the founders start fighting. I've witnessed the same thing exactly when the revolution happened. And I would say it failed the next morning. After February 11, just sweeping Tahrir Square was a dangerous thing. It looked nice. nice. A lot of people all over the world really appreciated people after doing a revolution going and cleaning the street. But think about it. It was too much of an early celebration. People did not know what to do. Clean up and then what? There was a serious problem there. And it's like, you know, you have a startup, you sell your first product, and then what? You go and party. What's next? How do you take it from there? You're not done. And that's a serious problem in revolutions as much as it is in startups, is how to maintain growth, how to keep growing, and how to keep aligning the internal teams. But not just the internal teams, you need to form partnerships to succeed, which we're not educated to do. But you can rarely succeed in this world as a small company, as a small startup, without forming the proper partnerships. You have to have somebody helping you here, somebody you're helping in return for something. I mean, some of your competitors may be your partners at some point in time. And again, if I think about the revolution, none of that was well thought of. The Egyptian revolution was entrepreneurial to start with, definitely. It came as a surprise to everybody. I personally traveled to the US on January 24 because I was selling my company to Intel, so I came here to have negotiations on the 25th of January 2011. And I thought, well, there may be some demonstrations, there may be something there, but I never thought there would be something serious happening in Egypt. Nobody that I know of believed that there will be real change. But it happened. It took us all by surprise. And it's the same way a startup all of a sudden pops up. So that part is amazingly interesting, but relatively easy to do. It's the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing that are far more difficult. And the more you climb up, the more it becomes of a challenge to keep growing. But what the revolution did was positive in a sense that it freed up people, it freed up minds, that people can start thinking, well, the legacy is gone, the state is not as powerful as it used to be. I can induce change, so why can't I just go and do a new idea and succeed in doing that idea? And you could see the effect almost immediately. By mid-2011, I had met more than 100 startups, not just in technology, in many things. A number that I mean, in the 10 years before that, I did not see more than 10. So all of a sudden, in a few months, you're seeing hundreds of startups. And the effect was primarily in environmental change. The culture was the same. Egyptians remained Egyptians. And whatever was entrenched in the culture was still entrenched in the culture. But the environment surrounding them was different all of a sudden. People felt like there is more freedom, they can think free. I know one of the companies I invested in, somebody who studied engineering, 3rd grade in Tanta, and decided to do his company. And his parents were going crazy. You have 1 more year to go. Can't you just wait? No, I can't wait. I have to do the company. And he gathered a few of his friends and they did the company, and which is, again, something quite unheard of for an engineering student in Egypt. I personally never heard about it. And I even don't understand how his parents let him do that in Egypt. With the Egyptian way of thinking, I think that was extremely revolutionary. But I can almost for sure say that without the revolution, this person and his parents would have not taken that path. Almost for sure, they would have rejected, he would not have thought of leaving the university, and he would have not started up his company, maybe never, or at least maybe not while he is still a student. So, in a sense, the revolution just made people think more freely, openly, aggressively in terms of taking risk, and so on. I would not go as far as saying entrepreneurship started after the revolution in Egypt and in the Middle East, because there has been always a lot of entrepreneurship in the Middle East, by the way. However, in most of the cases, it has been associated with family businesses. Family businesses are relatively big. If you look at the private sector in the Middle East, you'll find a huge chunk of it in the hands of family businesses. And anybody who studies that finds out that there was a parent or a grandparent who was an entrepreneur in the early 19th century or 20th century or sometime, and he started something, and that family business grew to where it is today. So entrepreneurship has always been there, but primarily in the form of family businesses, and not in the amount that we have witnessed and seen in the last 3 years. If I continue the line of family businesses, why a lot of them succeed is because they avoid this conflict of forming a team, and it's a family, it's inside the family, and hence they don't have that problem. The revolution could not have been done by one group or one family. It had to have many stakeholders, people from the left and the right, and all kinds of social background and ideological background and so on. So in that sense, you cannot compare the two. But I'm just stating that family businesses have been traditionally quite entrepreneurial. In many cases, it has been handed over in family business from one generation to the next. And we have witnessed different types of transitions. The next generation takes over and relaxes. The grandparent or the parent did something good, they relax into the job, they maintain what the grandparent did or what the parent did, and it cruises. But just, flat curve. We've seen also next generations in family businesses start revolutionizing the family business. A great example is in India, not in Egypt, a person called Azim Premji. He's the CEO of Wipro, one of the biggest companies in technology in India. And he was studying actually in the US when they called him up and said, "Come back, your father is dying." And he went back, and his father had family businesses in oil and some food industry and so on. And when he came back, he could have continued what his father did, and that's what normal family businesses do. But then he decided to switch to information technology and build a 50,000, 60,000 employee company, $15 billion company. And at some point, he was one of the top richest 50 people in the world by doing this transition. So family businesses could take either, the boring, saturating route, or actually the declining sometimes route, or somebody from next generations becoming yet another entrepreneur, not relying on the initial entrepreneur, but doing his own role and revolutionizing the businesses of his parents and growing it again. That aspect remains unchanged and has not been affected by what happened in Egypt in 2011. What has been affected is the very young, fresh out of college, who don't have a family that built a business for them, who all of a sudden became very aggressive in terms of, let's build a business. And as I said, by the end of 2011, I have seen at least 500 startups, most of them in technology, come and meet and discuss and ask questions and so on. I'm sure there is at least a factor of 5 more that I haven't seen, because I haven't seen everybody. And I'm primarily in Cairo, but there have been also startups in many places. Recently I was in Luxor. 4 months ago I was in Aswan. And you go to these places, and honestly, they don't have alternatives. There's nothing there except if you have a good idea to start it up. I mean, those are places which rely primarily on tourism, which is not doing very well at the moment. Other than that, everything else is Pharaoh style. The way they do agriculture, you go to the fields there, it's Pharaoh style. It's 5,000 years ago, the way they do the irrigation, the way they do the crops, everything is 5,000 years old. Nothing has changed there. So once tourism went down and the revolution happened and people started being courageous, I met really fantastic young people, very energetic, lots of positive energy. Despite all what's happening on the political arena and the division between people taking sides and taking camps here and there and so on, all of that I didn't see. I saw young people wanting to change their life. They want to change the way they live. Ladies, actually, in the last Luxor Startup Weekend, there were 45% ladies starting up companies. 45%, even in the Silicon Valley, even in the US. If you have a competition of startups, you will never find that ratio of ladies. So it's really amazing that this is happening, and I think this is quite irreversible. It's happened already. The young generation has now the courage. They want to do not just because of money. They want to do because it gives them freedom, it gives them self-identity. It's exactly like the revolution. Had it been successful, I don't think it was, but anyway, the change that you can do is amazing, and it gives you a lot of courage to continue. Now, if we go back to the main reasons of failures, I think I mentioned the first one being, the teamwork, the alignment between founders, the partnership formation, etc., being really weak in Egypt and in most of the startups I've seen. And the second one is marketing. A lot of companies, and I'm sure a lot of you are very techy, very engineering oriented. I was one myself. And when I came back from MIT to Egypt in 1991, I thought, PhD, MIT, I've done it all, I'm a good engineer, let me start a company. And I started, what is Egypt? Solar energy, let me build a company that builds solar panels and use it in energy generation. But honestly, I had no sense of marketing, no sense of business. And that's something you just have to learn the hard way. I know there are people even at Sloan School who learn business, but learning is something and doing it is something else. So whether you're an engineer, where your biggest challenge is always solving a complex engineering problem, or whether you're even an MBA student or a PhD at Sloan and you're studying some aspect of business, going to the field, selling what you have, marketing it, forming the right partnerships to succeed, all of these aspects are very tough. And today, I think they are the bigger challenges for any company in the world, not the engineering aspects. With all due respect, as I said, I'm an engineer myself, but the challenge to sell your product, I've seen very bad products being sold. I will not name them. And I've seen a lot of excellent products fail in my lifetime. Really excellent products. Those I can name. For instance, the OS2 from IBM. It was the best operating system you can ever think about. It was ahead of Windows by at least 10 years. It was really something great. Never made it. Probably you never heard about it. It's not your generation. But OS2 in 1990 could do what Windows did in 2004 or 2005. And yet, it didn't make it. So it's not just the product of the engineering aspect, and a lot of the startups I see don't know what to do. They know the technical problem, they have a good idea, a lot of them are actually very bright. Again, let me give you an example from Luxor that I just heard last month when I was there. They saw Ward al-Nil. Ward al-Nil are plants that just spontaneously grow in the River Nile and reduce the flow of the river. So they have a very negative aspect on the flow of the river and particularly during the low season. They also realized that Ward al-Nil has a very high content of protein. So they said, okay, we'll collect it, free the Nile from it, which is positive on its own, so nobody will object to us collecting it and nobody will charge us money for it because we're doing a favor. And then we will mix it with some crops and things and make food for the cattle out of it, because it has so much protein, much more than soya and so on. It would be a great idea to do it. To that level, it's a great initiative. Everything sounds good. But if you leave these guys on their own, they will not succeed. Who are their partners? Who are their, how will they package it? How will they go and sell it on their own? Will they just license the technology? Will they mix it and form a mix and somebody else takes the mix and packages it? When you ask them these questions, what? All of these questions? We thought we just have a good idea and we'll sell it. So what do you sell? You sell packaged, you sell an idea, you license, you sell the IP. What do you sell? How do you collect? We did collect some, yeah, but will you take boats and go every morning, you know, on a tour in the Nile, and wherever you find, you just collect like this? And how much will you be able to collect this way? How do you mass produce this? How many tons will you produce a day? Very simple questions, but all of these are not related to the complex challenge that they saw, which was, you know, the idea, the mix, the chemistry, and they did a prototype and they got approval on it. So that aspect is covered, but the business aspect, the marketing aspect, the sales, all of that is a challenge. That's when you're producing something that you're selling local. Imagine that the problem is multiplied by 10 times if you're producing something that you want to sell globally. If your product, if you wanted to feed the cattle in Mexico by this product, then the challenge is even much bigger. How do you reach Mexico? How do you sell your product there, and so on? So the two things that hamper success in many startups in Egypt nowadays are, in my mind, the two reasons why the revolution could not make it to the end. And I mean, the jury is still out, but basically people fought together. Those who were together during the revolution are now fighting together on all spectrums and on all the topics and so on. And they had no plan, they had no vision for whom, what will they sell at the end, to whom, and so on. I'm just using the analogy again. But in reality, if you talk to the people who, I went to then Tahrir myself, and once I returned from the US on that trip, because obviously the deal with Intel at that point stopped. They told me, you don't even know what's happening in your country, go back home and we'll talk to you later. We did manage at the end to sell the company to Intel, but that was in March 2011, after the dust settled. But basically, when I went to Tahrir, you couldn't even find a leader. You couldn't even, who's the CEO of this in business sense? Who's the CEO? Who's running this show? Where's the vision? Where's the strategy? What's your business plan? Exactly the same questions we ask a startup. We ask the people there in the revolution and say, so how can it succeed? Could it have ever succeeded without any of these ingredients? It's like imagining somebody saying, or 10 people here saying, okay, we have this great idea, there's a problem in how people do this. We know how to solve it, and let's just break down the way people do it today, and then we'll solve it later. Is that a company? No. So, you know the problem, that's one part, but what will you do next? And who's going to lead? Who's the business leader? Who's the CEO? Where's the business? How are you making money out of it? How are you going to grow it? It's all lacking. And this is exactly what lacks in a lot of revolutions, because people are very emotional about revolutions. They think that the problem they are seeing is the biggest thing. They want to bring it down, end the problem, and that's it. Many times, quite often, you end a problem just to face new problems. Bigger ones sometimes. I would say that the problems we're facing today in Egypt are bigger than the ones we had in 2010. I mean, we had problems, for sure. But what we're facing today is even bigger. So you eliminated one and you created 10. So in that sense, a revolution like a failing startup did not deliver because it was not all well planned the way it should have been. And the lack of leadership is a big problem. I cannot imagine a startup without a leader. A leader, at the end of the day, there is democracy, you can vote, you can do this and that, but in startups, a leader at very critical points in time has to take decisions. It's not about voting and seeing what everybody wants and so on. It's about taking hard decisions for the sake of succeeding. And if you're in charge, you have to take these decisions. Either they are right or wrong. They could be wrong, but at least you are in charge, you take the decisions. Leadership is a very essential ingredient for the success of startups. Leadership is a very essential ingredient for the success of revolutions. The ones you hear about as successful revolutions, quote unquote, you will always find that they had leaders behind them. Somebody, some mastermind, somebody taking the decisions on behalf of the rest. And whether it's good or bad, whether that revolution had a very good impact or not, but the revolution itself achieves its goals. Whereas in our case, I think leadership was missing and remains, to a large extent, not being there. And hence, it's hard to believe that the initial phase of the revolution will continue. We may have another one. We may have another phase. I don't know. It's like a startup not succeeding but not closing. And in that sense, you have to start thinking. And I've seen many startups in that phase, which is they started, they had a problem, they wanted to solve it, and then they didn't know how to solve it, and they started fighting, but they didn't close yet. What do you do with a company that is not making money, people fighting together, but it didn't close? That's where the revolution stands today. And in many cases, just to leave with a positive note, people have managed to pivot around the original idea and come up with a twist of it, reunite, maybe one or two step out and become silent partners, the rest continue. I've seen scenarios where startups manage to succeed after an initial hiccup. That's not unheard of. In fact, some go through some roller coaster. A very good example is Apple. And what I say about disputes between leadership and so on did happen in Apple, by the way. So you've seen what happened to Steve Jobs, come in, go out, come back, all of that, the original idea, and then slow down, the company almost going bankrupt, and then picking up again, novel ideas, as if it was reborn again. It did happen, and it does happen to many others, not just Apple. And this is my hope. This is my hope with the revolution, that, again, if I continue the analogy of revolutions with entrepreneurship, is to find a new life or a new phase for that revolution, where people fix the old problems, where they agree on a leadership, where they agree on goals, on business plans, what they want to really achieve, how they will achieve it, time frames. All of these details apply to revolutions, to countries, as well as much as they apply to startups. Without plans, without targets, without KPIs that you can measure your success with, it all becomes very, ill-defined. If you open TV today, I'm sure some of you have access to Egyptian TV, and you open the channels, you hear 60, 70 talk shows every day, right? And everybody's become an expert. Everybody's talking about something. Yeah? Talk is cheap, but you rarely find somebody, at least respecting intelligence of people like you from MIT, talking logic, sense, steps, time frames. Have you ever heard any of these buzzwords, time frame and KPIs and steps and so on? I have not. I watch TV almost every night to find anybody talking any sense, and I can't. So without a new life into this revolution, exactly the same way startups sometimes succeed in defining a new life, the destiny is the destiny of most of the startups. 90% of startups just fail. They announce failure, they close, they go bankrupt, whatever it is. The same will apply, and did apply in history to many revolutions. They just fail. They don't manage to achieve any of their goals because of the reasons we mentioned before. So I think the next thing to come in Egypt is continuing the entrepreneurship push. That, I believe, is irreversible. And again, I say that with a lot of confidence, because it's not just in Cairo, it's not just in Alexandria. I went to Mansoura, I went to Luxor, I went to Aswan, I went to Bursaid. It's all over. The young people are fed up with just waiting for somebody to solve their problem. The state, on the other hand, still believes it is in charge of everybody, it will solve the problems, it has to generate the jobs, it has to generate the budget, it has to do this and that. So there is a disconnect there. And the only solution for the disconnect, and that's what I advise all the startups, is to ignore the state, to just act as if there is no state and do their business, try to, you pay your taxes, of course, and so on, but don't count on selling anything to the government or getting too close to the government these days, because this is only going to slow you down. Try to define something that you can push on your own. When I did SysDsoft, I said, okay, we have very good engineers, we can design things. Khaled Mahboub was one of our very early engineers.
Yes.
And we never sold anything to the government, we never counted on it, we didn't ask for a grant, we bootstrapped the company, we were sitting all in one room, remember? Everybody sitting in one small room like this, facing each other, thinking about new products, new ideas, and to sell it to the global market. So we're not relying on anything in Egypt, and we managed at some point in time to have customers all the way from China to California to Europe, and so on. We managed to do that out of Egypt, in technology, in very high tech, by the way, without much difficulty, I would say. The challenge was, again, the marketing, the business development, going out, selling the idea to others. I remember very well the first 2-3 years when I went to California to try to sell them a chip design coming from Egypt. They would look at me and say, who's that crazy guy? coming to the Bay Area to sell us a circuit design done in Egypt. And first hour of discussions used to be, Egypt, why Egypt? What's in Egypt? Do you really have engineers? Do you have anything there? All of these questions. Luckily, after 2 to 3 years, when we had some successful happy customers, successful projects, and so on, these questions stopped. And believe it or not, I mean, I used to go to a big show in Barcelona called Mobile World Congress, and people say, you're the Egyptian company which does this and that. After a while, the barrier was lowered and lowered, and we had big names in our customer list without difficulty after a while. So it is doable, and it can be repeated in many things if you look at the problem from a pragmatic point of view. Don't look at the engineering aspect, the technology, the complexity of it. Look at how you can help others. And what's the value you give to the others? The value I was giving to them was excellent engineering for low cost. That's the value I was trying to sell. And it sold very well. India created 4 million jobs by doing exactly that. Good technical people, educated in good engineering schools in India, and lower cost than the US and Europe. So they managed to create 4 million jobs. $60 or $70 billion of exports just from the IT sector in India. Egypt, together, combined with all the oil and cotton and everything, does not export more than 30 billion. And the IT sector in India exports 60 billion. So you can do it in IT, you can do it in any other discipline. It's not depending on the discipline. It depends on defining who your customer can be, what's the value proposition, and go and sell that value proposition to them. And when they buy it, you build it. Don't invest too much in the idea and in building it and trying it and so on before you know how the customer will react to it. This is the clever way of doing things. I see a lot of companies come to me and say, I have this great idea. I say, tell me about it. They start telling me, oh, this is a good idea. What do you want? Oh, I want $2 million. What? $2 million? Why? Oh, I have to build it and test it and do this and do that, and we need like 50 engineers and for 3 years, and then what? And then we'll sell it. I say, no, that doesn't work. It doesn't work this way. You have to know whom you're going to sell it to. You have to get the specs from that person. Don't build something that nobody asked you for, assuming you know all the specs and you know how it will look like, and you shove it into their throat and say, hey, pay me money for this. You cannot do that. You have to know what they want and build it accordingly. And if you're clever, bootstrap, build something small, use $200,000 instead of $2 million, build something small, make money out of it, then build the next generation, and so on. Nobody builds one version of one thing. You always build things in steps, in versions, in generations. Even the big companies do that. So if you're small, don't build this monster, this 800-pound gorilla over 5 years, spend your money, and then pray that somebody will buy it from you. So that aspect is very important, but if the young generation is coached well, if they are really shown the way, and if they listen, not all of them listen well, but if they listen and they avoid the disputes and the feuds between the partners and the founders and so on, I think we'll hear some good news. Personally, I invested in 9 companies. Already 3 of them are doing great, I would say. 1 has almost stopped, which is statistically very good. 3 are doing very well, and the rest are, you know, at least half of them will probably make it. So statistically, it's actually very high compared to even startups here in the US or in the Silicon Valley and so on. So with mentorship and with helping them, guiding them and so on, I think you can increase the level of success. And a lot of people who are well educated and have exposure like you can eventually help those young people, mentor them one way or the other, network them, etc., to increase their level and chances of success. By doing so, you not just make one company successful, you raise the whole spirit of the country. One success story encourages 10 people to repeat that success story. And by doing so, the whole spirit becomes more positive. And ignore everything else. There are a lot of negative things we can talk about or discuss, or that could stop us even from waking up every morning. Okay? But don't let yourself go into that mood, because in Egypt, you know, we're too emotional. I think we have to become more pragmatic. Let's do what we can do in a small circle, do some change, incremental, whatever it is, and then try to grow from there. And what I see is people with that spirit. I see a lot of people with that spirit. And I'm almost sure we'll witness success. But the environment that was created in 2011 that allowed them to do that, freedom and thinking and so on, will be very important to continue that way, which is a question mark. Will the next regime in Egypt endorse that line of freedom and allow people to grow and startups and so on? Or will it be back to, you know, central state control, the government does it all, forget about these guys who have startups, just hire them to work in the government, etc. That I don't know, it depends. But if the new regime is clever enough to realize the power of the youth in this country, and all what you need from a good government and a good state is to act as a good regulator, as an authority for law enforcement, and so on. This is what good governments do well. Governments are never good in running businesses, in building companies, or owning companies. And we've seen what we call in Egypt the public sector. A lot of big companies are owned by the state and are all losing money every morning, because governments are very inefficient in running businesses. So whatever will happen in Egypt will have a very clear influence on entrepreneurship and on the entrepreneurship scene, because either they will give them more freedom, more deregulation, and more emphasis on the value that can be created through entrepreneurship. You know how much the size of the economy in Egypt is in small and medium enterprises? 75%. 75%. 80% of the jobs in Egypt are in small and medium enterprises. They're not in the government. So putting a lot of strength behind those small and medium and entrepreneurial ideas and so on is the way to go. If the new regime is clever enough to realize that, then the regime will be happy, the entrepreneurs will be happy, and Egypt will be happy at the end. If not, then unfortunately I think we'll be, you know, going backwards by 50 years or something to the Nasser time, and then only God knows. I'll stop at this note with all the positive and maybe negative aspects of what's happening, but in general I would say I'm optimistic, because the youth is very powerful, and we're a very young population. We have a lot of young people, and therefore people like you can play a role the same way I went back and tried to play a role in Egypt. I failed many times before making any success stories, but that's part of the game. So I wish you all good luck, and I wish to see many of you in Egypt soon, and let's work together. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Khaled, for the very exciting talk. Now we have time for the Q&A. If you have a question, just please raise your hand.
I will be the first one to ask questions. First of all, I would like to state that I was the fourth or the fifth engineer, as Dr. Khaled just mentioned, in Salt, and I worked there for like 3 years. When I left Egypt, unfortunately, to do my PhD, I left. It was like we started as like 5 engineers, and I think when I left Egypt, it was like almost 50 or 60 engineers when I left. And I kept like tracking what is going on. This is the Salt until it was bought by Intel, and I was very proud of being part of this at one time. I'm very happy to see you again after like maybe a few years to see you back here in Boston, we see you here in Boston. So I have a couple of questions. The first question is this like the increase of the number of startups only happened due to the revolution or due to also the technological advances or whatever is going on, like social networks and social media and all this kind of platforms that came from, unfortunately, outside Egypt, and now everybody is using it to increase that was one of other motivations to increase the number of startups in Egypt. And if it was only because of the revolution that freed up people to think about startup, I see from your tone that you are very optimistic about what's going to happen. But to be honest with you, at least this is my own feeling. When maybe I'm abroad, I don't know what's going on in Egypt that much. But when I communicate back with the people from different companies, I see that it doesn't look like that helpful or like that good atmosphere for like startups and other companies. Even like we heard like Yahoo stopped their offices there. Some rumors about other companies being sold. Everybody is trying to leave the country and go outside, and they are trying not to think about other countries in the Middle East. Even I know people in IBM, they are saying about, they are saying that they are trying to transfer their stuff into Morocco and other countries of the Middle East. So how do you see it in the future? That's a couple of questions. Thank you very much for the time.
Whatever big companies do, I cannot comment on. I mean, the official announcement of Yahoo is that they have problems and they are consolidating work in some countries and other stuff and so on. So I cannot really comment much on that. But I'm counting more on the future. I mean, if you look at the snapshot today, maybe you're right. A lot of people would feel very disappointed, and the result of the revolution is not there. But if you interact with the young people and you feel the energy and the numbers that are there, I mean, you do a business plan competition in Luxor and you get like 300 applications. Everyone is a team of 5, so that's 1,500 people in just one city in Upper Egypt. And I don't think that was possible before the revolution, honestly. So I think it did free up people in a good way, answering your first question. But when I'm leaving with a positive note, I think it's counting on the future more than today's snapshot. And what big companies do is irrelevant in that respect. I mean, all of those US companies, Yahoo and IBM and all of them combined, they hire maybe 2,000 people in Egypt. All of them combined. That's not a big deal, right? It's not a big number.
I guess I don't know. Thank you for coming. It's wonderful to have you here. I've heard about you before, like, I don't know you, but I've heard about you a long time before. Like, you were one of the few people I've heard about who actually did a startup in Egypt that's technology-based. And for a bunch of people like us here, this is incredibly inspiring because we do a lot of high-tech stuff, and that's exciting. But we're always faced with the prospects of this is probably not something that we can take home. So it's incredibly inspiring to see someone who did that in high-tech. And naturally, I have a bunch of questions. Basically, you painted this image of how things are, but you never went into the details. So I'm curious about a few things, and it's basically like sitting here now and looking from afar at Egypt. There are tons of ideas. The hardest part is how, for example, for you, how did you decide to make the decision to go back? What was the thought process? If you're comfortable sharing that. When you went back, what were the first things you stumbled upon? How did you deal with them? It's a very different ecosystem here. You come to MIT, you filled with all this energy and enthusiasm and ideas and great, amazing things, but a lot of it is just a place. It's not completely you. And just like, can you go through your experience in that, including the failures?
Well, failures are plenty, but when I was here at MIT, I was an experimentalist, okay? So people still remember me here in the lab when I come and visit, they say, you're the guy who did this crazy experiment here and there. I really did crazy experiments, and I was given the choice to work on a mundane topic, you know, where I had little risk to achieve results and finish my PhD. And I was offered to work on nanotechnology and quantum wave electronics, and you know, at that time, nobody, I mean, I was one of few places in the world doing such crazy work. And I selected that. Did I have assurances that I will get results? No, it was a big risk. But you know, that's my nature of taking risk. And I went, I did experiments, I stayed the whole year without achieving any results, to the level where, you know, I was so devastated. You know, here I come to MIT, and the whole year has gone, I don't even have a single positive result. And my advisor started putting pressure. He was receiving grants from DARPA and ARPA and whatever, and he had to deliver results. So you can imagine the amount of pressure. So I took that back home, and I stayed as an experimentalist. I did not have a game plan going back to Egypt, very honestly. I was faculty member at the university, but I knew that for sure, I knew that this is not my future. I only went back to fulfill what I had to do and help the next generation. I had some students study with me. I sent most of them to MIT and Stanford and so on later on. But in reality, I knew that I had to experiment in Egypt. And my first startup, the solar cell company, did fail. And my second failed because one of the shareholders decided to open a parallel company just doing the same thing, and took even all the workers and closed our factory. So crazy things can happen in Egypt. Partnerships are very difficult, as I said before. I did another company.
Were you at the university at that same time?
I was at the university at the same time. I was working like, I think I was working for about 10 years non-stop, without vacations, and on average, something like 100 hours a week. So that's part of the recipe. You experiment, you work very hard, and you think smart, and then you fail. And then you start another thing, and you fail, and eventually you will succeed. So I failed another company doing software for doctors, which is not my field. I'm not a software person, but I thought this is very good. Software was coming, and PCs were becoming very popular in the early 90s, and doctors were really the right people who may use it. But I made the mistake that I just told you about. I never asked doctors what they want. I just pushed the solution to them. Here's one for the eye doctors, one for the this doctor and that doctor. But you know, it was ahead of its time. Nobody wanted to buy it or to pay money for it, etc. And we closed again. So the failures are plenty. But you know, it doesn't discourage entrepreneurs. It's part of the learning curve. It's like, you know, as if you continued graduate study for another 2 years or 3 years. Why do you do graduate study? Because you want to learn something, right? So a failure is, in my mind, exactly the same thing. It's 2 years of learning something. And then you start doing the right thing the next time or the next time. So that's my view. Technology is not a must. I don't think, I mean, back to the question of Khaled, did people just jump on this because technology became so easy? I don't think so. I have a lot of startups. The word in Nil has nothing to do with technology, right? There are people in Aswan doing al-garid of al-nakh. They take and they make furniture out of it. Has nothing to do with technology. The guy from Tanta who quit school before finishing engineering does recycling of electronic waste. Has nothing to do with technology. So, in fact, I advise people in Egypt to look at relevant problems, things that they look at their surrounding and they see that people will use and may use and are suffering from, and they find a simple solution for it, not a complex one, a simple one They ask people, what if I offer you this, how much would you pay for it? And if they find good feedback, they go and do it. And because we're so underserved, his brother has a great company. It's doing health management. Nobody can manage his health in Egypt today. I mean, it's such a chaotic system. We're so underserved when it comes to health in Egypt. Only 1 or 2% have health insurance. All the rest in Egypt, you know, just go to this doctor once, go to that doctor, and they don't even know their blood cell type or anything. We don't know anything about our health in Egypt. A lot of people live and die without even doing an examination or a checkup, medical checkup. So that's a serious problem, and he has a great idea how to tackle it in a very pragmatic way. No innovation. It's just doing it right, operationally, tactically, finding customers. He's growing he's doubling year on year. And I think he will be a very big company in 3 to 5 years. Just because he's tackling a serious problem in a smart way, but simple, straightforward. And he's willing to experiment, do this, do that, and so on. I think these are the rules for success. And they are simple. They are not that difficult.
Any more questions?
But what I don't like is people going back to Egypt and say, oh, nobody's helping me. I want to, I will go back if, you know, there's no if. You go back, you know, and you try hard and you do something. But, you know, putting conditions, oh, I go back only if, probably you'll never go back.
Sorry, I can follow up on that. That's okay. How did you come up with the idea? So one of the bigger problems in Egypt is payments, right? There isn't a lot of, the entire economy is, you know, we import lots of stuff, we don't make too many things, and so if you base whatever you're doing on something local, you always face that problem that, you know, you end up with people not, you know, and chances are they won't pay too much. But one of the good things about CitySoft is you know, your customers go outside.
Yes.
So that is, how did you stumble upon that idea? Were you in the space? Were you like integrated in the space and you met someone and you find the need before?
No. I looked at the landscape and I saw what's happening in India. Honestly, my plan with CitySoft was originally to form a Wipro. I said Wipro at that time was 30,000 employees. Okay, how did they start? They started with 10. So from 10 to 30,000 meant just more years, adding more team, looking at what the world needs from the technology companies, doing it right for low cost. And I had the ingredients. I had the brains, I had good people, I had the low cost. So my plan was doing what Wipro did. And so I did not innovate in that respect. But what I realized, and that's what is very important in entrepreneur, is to pivot or change course the minute you see something not working. You know, the faster you are, the better you're off. So I looked at this and I started, and we hired like 5 people and then 10. And after a while, you know, I was hiring 1 or 2 more. And what's going on? I mean, when will I reach 30,000 like Wipro? Probably never. Why? Because the only 5% or less of the graduates are good. The rest are really terrible. You know, you cannot even start anything with the rest. So I looked at the numbers. It didn't add up that the Indian model, where they get from just the IITs 35,000 graduates a year, you know, I could not. So the minute I saw that happening, I said, okay, this is not the right model. Let's build IP. And when you build IP, you can sell it to many customers. When you do design service, you have to grow by scaling, by increasing the number of people. So the Indian model was, in Wipro, for instance, they have 1,000 people being interviewed a day. Every morning, 1,000 people get interviewed in Wipro. Now, I could not do that. So immediately when I saw that happening, I realized my dream was wrong. But I twisted a little bit, went into building intellectual property, and we succeeded there. So you have to maneuver your way. I think that's very essential ingredient of a good entrepreneur. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalid, for your great inspirational speech. Back to the main topic, which is revolution compared to entrepreneurial. How does that tie to in your opinion, to entrepreneurs in the West? I mean, we have a massive brain drain from Egypt. The great minds go to MIT, Stanford, they usually stay there. They join companies like Microsoft, Google. Then we have, as you said, the revolution has sort of ignited this flow of entrepreneurial thought and action. And then you saw initiatives like Arab Development Initiative, Egypt Nigma, and all of those sort of popping up everywhere. Some of them are startups, they die, in a year or two they can't sustain themselves, but some of them remain. But then, how do you make a valid proposition for the Egyptians in the diaspora to join that movement? How can they do so, either from here or going back? What's the case to make to go back if there was one? And if not, then what's the case for them here?
I think people who have been trained well and educated well like you have a value wherever they are. You know, you can, if you want to help, you can help by being here, you can help by going back. You can always help, okay? But it depends on your personal preferences. What do you want to do? It's not what Egypt wants. I mean, give me one American citizen who would say, I'm doing this because the US wants me to do this. You never hear that. I'm doing it because I believe I can do it, because I can add value, I'm going to go and start up a company, or I'm going to work for the university, or whatever, because I think this is the right thing. The same thing applies to you. It's not what Egypt wants, it's what you want to do. And through that, you will help. I have no doubt. So, how can you help? I think you can decide to go back and open up a company. You can decide to go back and teach and give knowledge and mentorship to the next generation. If you decide to stay here, you can invest in some. I know Egyptians, at least in California, investing in startups in Egypt. Little amounts, but you know, this is a way to give back and at the same time maybe make money out of it. It could be a good investment. You could help the network. So if you're in a certain position here and you have knowledge of people or of institutions or things, and somebody, a startup in Egypt, wants access to them, you can help connect them to it. We're very bad at doing that, by the way, as Egyptians. If you look at other countries, I mean, we're very far from what the Greeks do to the Greeks, what the Japanese do to the Japanese, and what the Chinese do to the Chinese. We are very unique in that case, that every Egyptian is afraid to help another Egyptian somehow. So I say, let's do something about that. You know, so you can do things to help, I think.
Any more questions? Any more questions? Okay, with this, we end the talk tonight, and thanks a lot for
Thank you. Thank you.